you have the opportunity, however many times per day and however many number of practices you may own, to have a patient encounter with people every minute of every day. You need to make every one of them count from a patient experience standpoint.
This is Growth in Dentistry, a dental intelligence podcast, where we ask the question, what does growth in dentistry mean to you? I'm Steve Jensen, a dated dental nerd, and your host.
Welcome, everyone, back to another episode of the Growth in Dentistry podcast. Super excited for today's topic. I say that every time, but today I really am. We are going to talk about the industry in general and just get back to the basics. What does it take to be successful in 2025 and beyond? Now, before I introduce our guest for today, I wanted to give a quick shout out to the marketing team at Dental Intelligence for sponsoring this podcast week after week. It's a lot of work that goes in to producing these and making sure the content gets out on time and nicely and bleeping out all of my swear words. I'm just kidding, I don't. But, they do a lot of great work to support us, and I'm grateful for them for doing that week after week. And as a give back to the listeners, they are offering a $50 gift card for taking a demo of Dental Intelligence. If it's been a while since you've checked it out, or if you've never checked it out, it's definitely worth your time. They have automated all of the digital forms process. It writes those forms back into Dentrix, EagleSoft, Open Dental. They've got some really cool new scorecards, if you've heard about Dental Intelligence, for the number stuff, where you can take any number you could previously find and currently find in Dental Intelligence and put it in a view that you want to see, so that you can see exactly the numbers that you want to pay attention to and can ignore the rest and make your measurement a little more simple. So they've got some cool stuff they released if it's been a minute. Okay, with that out of the way, let me go ahead and introduce our guest today. And Perrin, I actually should have asked this before. How do you pronounce your last name? And then I'll share some cool stuff about you.
So the last name's DesPortes, Perrin DesPortes. It's French, but I'm not. I like to tell people that if when you're a kid growing up in South Carolina, if you pronounce it the French way, it means you get beat up on the bus going to school. So we didn't do it that way. DesPortes is close enough.
DesPortes. I would have jumped in and given it Perrin DesPortes or something like that, So
Spanglish is close. Yeah, that's good, Steve.
Well,
I'll call you Steve Johnson then, right?
There we go. For those that haven't met Perrin, Perrin has over 30 years of experience in dentistry. He's got a pretty cool rap sheet. He has 15 years at Patterson. He's got co-founder of Tusk Dental Partners. He's got co-founder of Polaris Health, which is a couple of big names in dentistry. And then now is running the Next Level Executive. He has his own podcast. I'll give a quick shout out here at the beginning. If you've not checked out his podcast, definitely want to go and give it a listen. And with that in mind, I really wanted to hear kind of in the beginning, Perrin, what got you into dentistry? I'm always interested in hearing people's kind of inception story, and then we'll talk dentistry, we'll talk business.
Yeah, Steve, thanks a ton for having me on today. I've been really looking forward to this conversation for a while, and I appreciate it. One podcast host to another, right? So the one thing that's probably not on my dossier there is that I was actually born into the business of dentistry, you could say. My family owned a dental distribution company called Thompson Dental Company that was started in 1899, headquartered out of Columbia, South Carolina. I was fourth generation in that business. My father was president and CEO when I entered the company in 1995. And my grandfather was chairman of the board, and we ended up selling that business to Patterson in April of 2002, not for financial or even operational reasons, but due to poor equity transition planning from one generation to the next. And that's a lot longer story probably than what we have time for today, and maybe revisit at some point down the road. But suffice to say, I would have loved to have worked a little bit longer in the family business and worked for my father, but I'm glad I had the 7 years that I did with him, and Patterson was extremely good to me, and I think set me up for a lot of success. And yeah, I had a pretty decent career over 15 years there. So very grateful for it.
I'm just going to make this comment for those that pay attention to the news and the stock market. We could probably have a whole conversation around Patterson as an organization. It barely went off the market. You can no longer find their stock ticker if you jump on Robinhood or Fidelity or whatever platform you're using. Patterson's gone. They are now privately owned, and they just had a big kickoff call this last week with the new private equity group and the newly placed CEO. So interesting movement in the market, certainly around.
Yeah, that may, if we recorded that podcast, we might not want to air most of it, Steve, because
Probably. So I'm interested to see where they take things in this new phase of their life.
I am as well. I think it's a good thing for the company overall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's jump into the industry. What are you seeing, Perrin? You have a lot of experience in this space. That's a really cool background. I didn't know that you were in before the Patterson thing. So yeah, that was not something that I had discovered. So that's fascinating in and of itself. So tell us a little bit about some of the trends you're seeing in dentistry that you find interesting, and then let's talk about some of the basics of what it takes to be successful.
Yeah, I think obviously still the biggest trend right now is the consolidation in the space,
Mhm.
and driven predominantly by private equity backed enterprise level DSOs. Dentistry or any type of healthcare services is no different than any other industry. You have larger businesses with greater economies of scale. They gain efficiencies. They reduce headcount. They can be more value additive to the consumer, and people tend to look at dentistry specifically, and then other aspects of medicine, being private equity driven or consolidator driven in the world of hospitals, and think that it should be any different from hardware stores or hotel and restaurant management or anything else, and it really isn't. So I think it's when you have a commodity based industry, be it consumables like Patterson would be involved in, or others, and then the commoditization of services, it lends itself to consolidation, generally speaking. We can talk about the impact of what consolidation and commodity-based pricing does for healthcare services, because I think that's something that really does confront the profession directly, and many are not prepared for it. But I think at the top end of the food chain, that's certainly still the dominant driver, even though M&A activity is a lot lower as we sit here and record this today, and probably will be for the balance of the year. But that it's not going to, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, to use the analogy, right?
Hmm. Now, with that consolidation, one of the things I've been noticing is I'm starting to see more providers be in an individual practice versus the past. Like I think the traditional dental model was, hey, I'm going to have one doc, two hygienists, I'm going to have a couple assistants, I'm going to have someone up in the front desk, and then I'm going to have like an office manager, treatment coordinator kind of a situation. And that was like your pretty normal team, if they've got 1,600 to 2,000 active patients. That's the ship that they're sailing in, and it seems like that has started to shift, probably driven, like you mentioned, by some of this consolidation, where I'm starting to see more doctors, providers getting packed into each individual practice. I'm also seeing in the data, one of the things that's interesting is I watch a number. It's this average treatment presented per exam, and that number has been going up every year for the last, as long as I've been watching it, 7 years. um, and so that one's interesting because it can be driven by a couple of things. One is, just general inflation, but it's not like reimbursements have gone up. I talk with enough practice to know they're not increasing their fees on an annual basis, generally speaking, with inflation. They probably should consider that more. But um, one of the things I've noticed is also seeing an increase in the variety of codes getting built out at general practices. So they're bringing things that used to refer in. I'm interested in your perception. There's all these things that they seem to be messing with in the market, adding providers, adding procedures. How do you think about creating a successful business, a successful practice in 2025? Because in the past, I think there was kind of this like you build it and they will come mentality, and there are some docs that are jumping in today realizing like, oh wow, like I can't just buy a low performing practice or start a scratch practice and just have it work out seamlessly.
Yeah. So, good question. There's a lot in there,
Yeah.
obviously, and
Sorry, I just kind of just spattered you with a bunch.
that's quite all right. So, I think the I would say the overarching principle, and you touched on this kind of indirectly, is that it used to be that in all of healthcare services, be it dentistry or otherwise, you could come out of school, hang out a shingle, have a practice full, and no longer be taking new patients in a relatively short period of time. And even for the world of dentistry, a lot of those were full fee, cash paying patients, full fee for service, and these were practices that were cash flow efficient for sure. They typically were open 3.5 to 4 days a week, but traditional hours 8 to 5, call it something like that. And it was a very low staffing model because you didn't have to employ too terribly many people for the delivery of those services or the collection of accounts receivable. And most of them, if they don't take insurance or something government payer wise, would be all but no accounts receivable. Well, now you've got membership plans and financial arrangements through treatment coordinators, and then pre-auths for insurance and overdue and outstanding AR and everything. All of a sudden, these are much more people dependent businesses to run due to the complexity of all of it. So we start adding headcount. That's our biggest line item on the P&L for one. And then certainly in the last couple of years, with you touched on inflation, we've all recognized that in dramatic increases in wage escalation. So,
Yeah.
it's created a lot of marginal compression because insurance reimbursement rates are either stagnant or declining in a solo practice. Obviously, at an enterprise level DSO or a larger group type practice, they have more negotiating power and can sometimes move the needle as it relates to that. But the complexities of running a traditional solo practice are very disadvantageous in today's world. That's not going to change. I would love to have a fee for service dental practice every bit as much as you, every bit as much as probably 95% of your audience would. Those businesses are becoming less and less so, and they are highly provider dependent. It is very difficult to scale a multi-location fee for service type of a model. It's even difficult to extrapolate that into an associate who works under the same roof as you do, because the relationship is so strong between the provider and the patient, and it's tough to hand that off, especially to a younger clinician. So I think to build a business in today's world and to have the model be a traditional fee for service practice that has all its cost advantages that we mentioned before is it's a needle in a haystack. I mean, that it would be the unicorn type of a business, right? And so I think what you see is that those that are recognizing that they want to build a business that is not dependent upon their clinical skill set alone for its existence, which I think is prudent. They're looking at bringing in an associate or several. They're looking at adding an additional location or two or three within a decade's time or something. Not a dramatic growth strategy, not one that is foolish in its speed or debt leverage, I would say, but simply building a business that's not dependent upon the founder's clinical skill set. And I think that's really prudent. It gets you a couple of economies of scale to a degree. It reduces some redundancy. You can start to open up additional days and hours. We can talk about some of that. But I think, if you're a young dentist, I say young, like first half of your career, and you got 20 years, 30 years to go, and you are a single dentist in a single location, that's going to be a tough equation to operate for the next 20 to 30 years and think that the income stream to you and your family is going to continue unabated. So I almost think like a methodical addition of locations is a defensive growth strategy in a way.
So let's hit, I think a natural question then is I'm listening to this thinking, okay, maybe I do need to open myself up to this idea of having additional providers in my space, or having other locations depending on the situation, because they might not have the space in their current location, and maybe a second location is a good option. Talk to me then, if I'm one doc, two hygiene, at what point, mathematically speaking, is it like, okay, I can start considering this associate thing or this other location thing? I like this idea of being prudent, creating a reduction in kind of risk if, oftentimes I think people will think more in like a lifestyle, like, man, I would like to reduce my days and still, make a higher wage, or I would like to be able to take some time off and know that my business is still running with associates. But there's also those situations where you might have an accident or something tragic where you want to still be able to use your skills here, in the mind, but maybe don't have the ability to execute on some of the clinical work. So in any of those scenarios, Perrin, how do you think about, or what are some good like benchmarks to say, okay, this is when I can start thinking about adding associates and or a location?
Yeah, so there's a lot to think about with that, and I'll give you a handful of things, maybe not in any particular order of importance for your audience, but just as a way of kind of unpacking this. So the first thing is, if we're going to add an associate and or an additional location, the dirty little secret is that every founder that does that takes an income hit when he or she starts to add an associate or add another location.
Yes.
And it is completely predictable, it's totally understandable, and to a degree, it's avoidable. So, my first piece of advice
Mm.
before even going down the road is start stockpiling cash. Because if you are the practice owner and you and your family have a lifestyle that's dependent upon you withdrawing all the cash out of your business to fund the kids in private school, the second home, the nice cars, the country club membership, all those things that we love as highly accomplished entrepreneurs and practice owners, if you afford all that out of your business and you have no margin for error to make a reinvestment in an associate, then it puts you at an income deficit and that puts you in a conflict with your family. That's a bad place to be. So if we know we're going to add an associate, yeah, we got to think about where we're going to put them, like physically, the number of operatories that we have and some of the overflow and things like that. How many patients are we going to start to transition off of our schedule and onto theirs? Are we going to need to invest in a marketing program to increase new patient flows or consider adopting some new insurance plans, things like that? So the physical space, are we going to be able to do that within our four walls, or is that additional days and hours, which could require additional staff? And then what does it do to us and our income if we have to start not only mentoring them, but handing off some of the work that we do with them? So I think stockpiling cash to float ourselves during that transitionary phase is incredibly important. Now, one of the specifics I'll tell you, and we can dig into more metric-driven type stuff if you'd like, is that there are a lot of, I guess, industry experts, be they financial analysts or economists that follow the profession of dentistry, and they're forecasting the industry to grow at roughly 4% over the next 3 to 4 years, 4% per year, compounded annual growth rate. So if we sit there and we think about that and we say, okay, if the industry, if the pie is growing at about 4% annually, what does that actually mean? How do we break it down? We know that enterprise level DSOs that are private equity backed reinvest a lot in marketing plans. They're obviously in normal times acquiring a lot of practices, but they're also adding a lot of associates that allow them to open up additional days and hours. The volume of revenue that they generate through those businesses is in the low to mid double digits, call it 10 to 15%. And if private equity backed groups make up somewhere between 35 and 40% of the industry, which I think is probably about reasonable, and if doctor led groups are not too far behind in terms of revenue generation and they make up another 10 to 15% ish, somewhere around there, 15 to 20%, that means half the industry is growing double digits.
Hmm.
If the entire industry is growing 4% and half of it's growing 10%, what does that mean for solo practice?
Yeah, I see where you're going. That means they're
Yeah,
losing share. Yeah,
exactly.
there's not enough of the pie there. Yeah.
Exactly. So the first thing we do is if we run a solo practice, we're looking at the top line revenue number that we've been able to generate the last couple of years and what we're forecasting to grow in the coming years. And you got to start to think, if I'm growing at 4% or less per year, I am losing market share.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we've got to solve for just keeping the boat afloat
Mm.
before we even start to think about bringing in an associate to do some of the work we no longer want to do.
Yep. Now I'm interested, once we get into growth, what are some of the main levers that you can pull on to make sure that you don't fall below that 4%?
Yeah, I mean, there are many, and I would maybe start this in kind of a fundamental answer that would be more, I hate to put it this way, Steve, but kind of textbook driven, right?
Yeah.
So when we think about unit economics and revenue drivers in any business, right? There's there's the potential customer base, like the people who walk into our store to buy the widget that we're selling, right? So we've got a universe of potential customers who come in and are potentially interested in what we do. And then we have the number, the percentage, how many of them buy the widget that we sell, so our conversion rate. And then the third piece to this is how much the widget sells for. So in marketing and sales, again, kind of textbook driven answer here, you got those three pieces. You got the potential customer base, the conversion rate, and then how much we charge for the good or service that we're providing. And I break it down to that because all too often this type of question originates to me from a standpoint of somebody saying, I'm so sick and tired of dealing with my marketing agency. They're not delivering any of the promise that they said that they would, and I'm just wasting money.
Mm.
Well, that very well may be the case. But when we start looking at revenue growth or lack thereof, let's break it down between marketing and, I hate to use the word sales, but that's what it is. So we invest in a marketing company and a marketing campaign to make the phone ring. Our first point of conversion is for who is the phone answer. That's actually probably
Yeah.
the first
Yeah.
point of conversion. The second point of conversion is if it is answered and it's a prospective patient, how many of them come in to see us? What's our phone conversion rate? When they do come in to see us for a comprehensive new patient exam or an initial exam or a hygiene visit or an emergency or whatever it is that they're coming in to see us, how many of them convert into further treatment, and what's the average value of a new patient in the first year of our practice? So when we understand the volume of making the phone ring, the conversion rate to get the interest and be able to present something to them, and then the average value of in the first year for a new patient, now we can start to better understand our unit economics and how it relates or doesn't relate to a revenue growth number in our business. I'm sorry for being a little bit,
No, that's great. I
academic
love
or
it.
esoteric.
No, I think that's brilliant. That's a great place to start. One of the things that's interesting related to marketing. So if we're getting folks into the business, one other trend I've started to see, you mentioned this equation of a doctor, if I think of it from a doctor's perspective, every time they do an exam, a limited exam or a consult, that's like a clinical opportunity to present treatment. And then there's a conversion rate on when they present, how much of that's actually going to get said yes to. And then there's on average, how much are they presenting? One thing that's been interesting I've been seeing that I think docs might be interested in hearing is I've seen some dentists who realize, hey, my diagnostic rate, and this is pretty normal across the industry, when I do a hygiene exam, about 1 out of every 3 patients, I have a chance to actually present some treatment to them, right? But they realized, hey, if I spend maybe a little more on marketing dollars, free up if I've got limited space on my chairs. So we're thinking about like chair utilization. If I've got limited chairs, if I decrease some of my hygiene volume and am successful at increasing some of my limited exams or consult time, those ones I can guarantee I have like 100% of an opportunity to present treatment. I've been finding some doctors that are having some pretty good success with messing with these levers. So as people are listening to you, Perrin, I just want them to hear like there's kind of a traditional way of doing it, which works, but you can also start to think creatively, like, hey, maybe I want to think about the opportunities I'm taking clinically to present treatment and see if I can't structure it in a way from my spending on marketing to my staffing, how my team size. So for this example, these two dentists who are doing this in their practice in New Mexico, they both only have one hygienist apiece that's full time, and then they're using that second chair that would traditionally be hygiene for, in one scenario, full mouth restoration consults, and the other scenario, the dentist is doing a lot of clear liners, so he's using it as clear liner consults. And obviously, this requires having this marketing success to fill those chairs. Because in the lack of that, you just have an open chair, and that's expensive. So I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on how you is that example I just gave maybe an outlier, like it's almost for the average dentist probably not worth considering, or is that like an interesting way to start thinking as a private practice owner?
No, it's a very compelling way to start thinking, but what I would caution the audience about is it's not foolproof. And the important thing to recognize, and this is one of the things that in my opinion, would separate a higher level marketing agency from maybe a mid-tier one. And I don't own or run or never have worked for a marketing agency, so take this with a grain of salt. But if you're going to start to do more high value treatment, you mentioned clear aligners, like all on X cases or whatever it may be, things like that, that would bump the average revenue per patient up substantially, and those services are in high demand. You've got to understand, and you got to be clear about what your target avatar is. In marketing parlance, an avatar is your ideal customer, right? I mean, so if you want to build a business like those people in New Mexico, those customers in New Mexico have they have identified who their target market is. All of their marketing and messaging focuses on the words, catchphrases, economic price points, and everything else that goes along with it. And a lot of their messaging is built to attract that audience into their practice. And they have the clinical skills to furnish the services, right? As well as present the treatment and close on it. Now, if you're a traditional general dentist and you don't have that type of a patient base, or you don't have that type of a practice, and certainly if you don't have that type of a skill set, you don't want to start to attract those patients, prospective patients, because your conversion rate may take a nosedive or go in the direct opposite direction. So I think it's important to understand who we are, what we do well, and if we want to adapt that, it needs to be adapted over time.
Yeah, that's a good call out because in one scenario, that marketing spend could math out. Like on paper, it's like, yep, this works. Like, yeah, but it has to line up with, like you said, the type of patients you're trying to bring into the practice, your skill set, and the avatar of that patient. Where in another scenario, that same marketing spend could not pencil out, and your conversion rate's low enough that it's like, this is not a good use of our money, unless you're trying to invest in like this new, you're trying to, dramatically change the persona of the business, then maybe you're gonna suffer through it a little bit as you're trying to work to figure that out. But yeah, that's a really good call out.
Yeah, and I think you got to also keep in mind that I don't mean this like arrogantly in any way, but if you're going to target a higher level clientele that spends more money on their overall healthcare, be it orally or otherwise, you've got to have all the systems, the people, the processes, the aesthetics, the high touch. It all has to reinforce that messaging, right? I mean, so if you're going to go after that segment of the market, it's the high-end car market, right? I mean, like the showrooms look and feel different than your lower end car type of a scenario does. It really does need to be all of that.
Let's talk maybe for a minute while we're kind of on this topic, because there's an element of of making sure that my practice fits what people would expect. At the same time, though, there's also practices who are like horizontally integrating, like they're bringing in more procedures. So there's also this potential that, like, I don't know, Perrin, maybe 10 years from now, people are like, yeah, this I'm just used to getting all of these procedures at a general practice, and maybe they don't, maybe I'm wrong, but maybe they won't demand as much scrutiny over like what the business looks like in the experience because it's maybe I don't know if commoditized is the right word, but they kind of just expect like, oh, I can get everything, pretty much everything done at my general practice, where 10, 15 years ago, it was just really commonplace to get referred out. Like you were pretty consistently getting referred out, where maybe in 10 years, that's just not happening as much. Thoughts there?
Yeah. This is the silent killer, honestly. And I think the ADA identified this in a report that they published. It was pre-COVID. I can't remember, probably like 2018, 2019 or something like that. Um, and I'll never forget one of the points was that, the younger consumers, which are probably millennials and younger now. I mean, think, mid 30s and earlier. The predisposition around this age set is to make healthcare service purchase decisions the way they do everything else in life, which
Yeah.
is price transparency and convenience.
Mhm.
Okay. So what that means is, I mean, I'll give you the counter example really quickly. I'm 54. I know my dentist on a personal level. His daughters have babysat for my daughter before. My wife goes to his practice. Back in the Patterson days, he was one of our, best customers and all that kind of stuff. I've known Cliff Smith for an incredibly long time. I don't know anything about clinical dentistry, but I know that he's taken all the CE and, is a CEREC dentist and can do all that kind of stuff. I have no idea what Cliff charges for a cleaning, but I'm not going to leave him if he goes up on a cleaning or a crown or whatever else by 10% or something, right? I have a personal relationship with him. And if he recommends treatment, I'm going to say yes. And if he says, Perrin, you got to come in and get it between 8 and 5 because I'm not staying late on a Thursday night for you, I'll show up between 8 and 5. I
Mhm.
am not the norm. Okay. So my generation is aging out of this kind of treatment envelope. The younger patient demographic, when they look for a place to get their teeth cleaned, they may not have a dentist of record or one that they're going to consistently. They may be choosing a dentist based on the hours of availability that are convenient to them. And that might be at 6 p.m. on a Thursday, or it might be at 11 a.m. on a Saturday. It may not be between the hours of 8 and 5, is my point. So when we start talking about tomorrow's practice today, I think the first thing is we got to start experimenting with some expanded days and hours and potentially even some weekend appointments to be more convenient for our prospective new patients, to allow them to come and see us when they want to, not when we want to be open. That's the first thing. The second thing dovetails into exactly what you said. I don't want to go to 6 different specialists to get work done. I'd like for my general dentist to be able to perform, you know, 80 to 90% of all the work that I would need or want willingly. And for the super complicated, super comprehensive, type of procedures, then yeah, I'll see a specialist for that. But I want to feel like my general dentist has the ability to be the quarterback of my oral health and provides comprehensive care to the greatest of his or her ability. And when you talk about horizontal kind of integration of services, I think that's the right way of putting it. So if you're a dentist that only does traditional types of dental procedures and you're only available traditional business hours, you know, it's going to be really, really hard to not become commoditized in the world that we live in presently and certainly going forward. So I think we've got to, if we're going to own a practice, and certainly if we're going to bring in associates, we talked about that earlier, we have to have doctor development plans, and the type of treatments that we're able to provide need to be reflected in our marketing campaigns, and all of our team and staff has to be able to talk the language of those procedures. We need to create confidence in the patient's eyes and mind that this is their dental home for about 80 to 90% of anything and everything they're ever going to need, and they'd be foolish to go anywhere else to get it.
I like that a lot. Now we time flies. I can't believe that we're already like sneaking up on the end here. So maybe I'll ask like a more generic question before I ask my last one, and that's, what advice for listeners? We have a combination of, practice owners, associates, some office managers that certainly listen to the podcast. What advice would you have for folks um, that just want to be successful in their career in dentistry over the next 10, 15 years?
Yeah, so I'll try to be brief here. First point of the answer would be that you have the opportunity, however many times per day and however many number of practices you may own, to have a patient encounter with people every minute of every day. You need to make every one of them count from a patient experience standpoint. You cannot forsake that time. It is very intimate, it's very personal. And you don't want to find that people left you because they felt like you didn't care. So make the most of the opportunities you have. The second thing is building upon that, understand that someone's oral health care is a very intimate, very personal type of a decision that they tend to make. We live in a people-driven business that is execution oriented. So just because we're the business owner, we have to make sure that we're able to translate everything through our people because we can't literally touch every patient that walks through. So our team is our ambassador for the business you and I want to build. The last thing I would say is you mentioned 10 to 15 years. If you have that long to go in the industry, this is going to be a much more competitive industry moving forward, not less so. And if yours is a business where you are a single clinician who owns a practice, that is going to be a diminishing proposition in my mind. You have to think bringing on an associate or multiple ones. You should think prudently about adding locations methodically, not necessarily quickly, but doing it prudently. And you have to be confident in your ability to lead, be an executive of a business that is not dependent upon your clinical skill set for its existence.
Yeah, that was really fantastic advice for such an ad hoc question. That was so good, Perrin.
Thanks.
Well, I asked this question. It's a similar flavor, but a little different. I asked this question to every guest. This is the Growth in Dentistry podcast, so we always finish up with the same question, and that is, what does growth in dentistry mean to you? You commented on it's a people-oriented business. You commented on the need to think more prudently around the business. I'm interested to hear kind of a final thought on what does growth in dentistry mean to you?
Yeah, look, I think some of dentistry's best days are still ahead of it, honestly. And I understand that people look at private equity-backed ventures, by and large from a negative perspective. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think the world is open to those entrepreneurial dentists who want to build, call it a smaller group, a handful of locations, and really be everything to their patients and create a greater experience. These are the people who are entrepreneurs who happen to be dentists, and most of them have experienced some level of clinical mastery, and they're wondering what's next, what's the next step in their evolution. I think this is the funnest segment of the space that can make the greatest impact for the longest period, and I think this is a wonderful time to be a part of it.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I don't know why. I just got the chills while you were talking. Like I think there's such a cool group of folks out there that are going to help lead a very interesting segment of this market into the future. So one of the things I'll just make sure I comment for the guests. Uh, Perrin does run, like I said at the beginning, the next level executive. And so if you're sitting here thinking like, man, I want this guy in my corner, I want to chat with him. I like the way he thinks about the future of dentistry. Perrin, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Yeah, the name of the business is The Next Level Executive, and the website is www.thenextlevelexecutive.com, thenextlevelexecutive.com. That's the name of the podcast as well, which I can send you the link if I didn't do that
Yeah,
before.
I'll
Um,
throw a link in the show notes to the website.
Great. Thank you for that. And yeah, I guess you consider me to be an executive coach of some sort. I have a program that a bunch of entrepreneurial dentists are in. I teach them a new principle every week around building a more cohesive, better run type of a business. And we roundhouse a discussion together on a weekly basis. So there's a lot of content that you can access off the website. And certainly, if you want to be part of the program, if it's the right next step in your entrepreneurial journey, I'd be happy to entertain a call and give you more details about it. You can find out a lot more on the website as well. But I really appreciate you allowing me to give a quick pitch for it, Steve.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm on the website right now, and this is something that I think it's like I'm ready to enroll in this. This is really fantastic. I like the way you've thought through the whole program. This is very cool. So thank you.
Well, thanks for allowing me on. I would just tell you one last thing.
Yeah, please.
It's ideally suited for people who've achieved practice mastery and they're wondering what's next. Before you go off and add an associate, before you go off and buy another location, why don't you just take a look at my website to make sure it's the right thing for you? And that's what the program is really all about.
Yeah, that's perfect. A perfect call out. Well, Perrin, thank you for joining us. And then thank you to the listeners for joining us again. This has been another episode of the Growth in Dentistry podcast. My name's Steve Jensen. Perrin, thank you again for joining us.
It's my pleasure today, Steve. Thank you for your time.
To the audience out there, keep growing, and we'll talk soon.